Recently, I was working with a client of mine, Melanie, and she has a problem. Every time partway through speaking, her mouth goes dry, like Phoenix Desert in August dry. And she shared with me that it feels as if her lips will not even go over her mouth. She kind of gets in this gummy situation where she's like just trying to get out her words. Every bit of moisture leaves her mouth. So as a speech coach, I started going through some different things she could consider, from changing her mindset about how she was thinking about public speaking leading up to the event, making sure she was really confident in her content and how she had outlined it, making sure she even gave herself some breaks in her content, a couple little video clips to, give herself just a moment to take a drink of water. And then, of course, I gave her one other tip that she could do while speaking, in the middle of speaking when that dry mouth came. And that, of course, is to think of lemons. No, really, just right now, if you spend a second and think about lemons, think about it, a little extra moisture will get to your mouth. Another client of mine, Scott, had a very different issue. He had written a book, a leadership book that contained 52 lessons on leadership, one for every single week of the year. The problem was when he was asked to speak, he would get up and he had so many ideas. Which ones do you share? There's 50, and what are we pulling from? And it wasn't bucketed in any sort of logical way for the audience. There was no clear roadmap. So we worked together to develop a framework to figure out how do we bucket these 50 ideas into 5 core concepts. And he came up with a B5 framework that he now talks about. Another client of mine, Kristen, is in the nonprofit space, and she's responsible every year to raise $10 million for her organization so that they can provide adoption aid grants and medical care grants. Her challenge was she regularly meets with small groups and houses, 3, 5, 12 potential donors. And when this time to tell stories came, her mind just kind of drew a blank, and it's what stories do you tell? How do you tell them? What story you pick for what donor group you're in? So we worked together to develop a story bank of ideas. I tell you these stories because I don't know your relationship to public speaking. I don't know if you love it and you're like, give me that mic, I want to be up there, if you hate it, or if you fall somewhere in between. But this is what I do know. Small changes to your communication can result in big impact. As Peter mentioned, for the last 20 years, I have walked alongside thousands of leaders just like you. And I've frankly been on an obsessive journey to answer one question. What does it take to become a great speaker? And more importantly for all of us today, how do you and I become one? And I'm not just saying speaking when you're at an industry event. I'm saying the way you show up for a one-on-one conversation or in a small group setting or even on a Zoom call. Now, I asked Peter when I met with him on the phone, I said, can I have all 3 days? I have a lot to share. And he said, no, you have 60 minutes. So I cannot share everything I know. But today I want to share with you in 2 main areas. And the first is who you are and your own ethos, your own speaker brand, and how you're showing up in a room. And we're going to do that by looking at your story, your authority statements, and your delivery. And then we're going to be looking at how you can share your company's mission and bring momentum there by those stories you tell, the numbers you share, and the future you imagine. So we have a lot to cover. I love interactive speeches. So I'm going to be giving you guys lots of time today to work on some of your own relationship with public speaking and how you're showing up. My goal today is that each and every one of you will feel more confident and more control of your communication when you show up in any room. But we need to start with addressing the problem that we all face when it comes to communicating our ideas. And that is, you only have 7 seconds to make a great first impression. This is research done by Princeton University. Some research also shows that you only have 1/10 of 1 second to make a good first impression. And even worse, 76% of the time, those gut instincts we have about somebody in those 7 seconds are correct, which means that we are up against a lot. It means that you need to be compelling, interesting, credible, like that. You have very, very little time. On top of that, let's even just say you have 5 minutes. Let's just be generous. Let's say we all have 5 minutes or even 10 minutes. We are all literally competing for the time, money, and attention of the most distracted generation that has ever lived. In his groundbreaking book, The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt says that we have a collective attention deficit disorder. In fact, in 2026, they say that the average American checks their phone 186 times a day. To put that in perspective, that means that we are checking our phones every 5.5 minutes. If I'm lucky, you will not be checking your phone 11 times while I'm speaking. But that's what we're up against. When you are meeting with somebody, with a donor, they are very mentally distracted. They have a lot going on. So we don't want to waste those beginning moments on, it's so good to be here, and I'm really excited. No, I want you to step into every conversation with confidence. And what this also means is I want you to give your donors something that only you can give. I don't want them to be able to Google your website, read your materials, look at your social media posts, and by the time you show up, it's like, I already know all this. I want you to give them something that only you can give. And that's you. You. Your unique stories, your unique perspectives, your passion. If you've never taken a class in public speaking, pretty much everything has already been said by this guy. This is Aristotle. He's already been mentioned a couple times this weekend because Brian just mentioned him. Brian, we need to talk later because I just love me some Aristotle. And he basically wrote the OG book on public speaking in 367 BC. In case you've never sat down to read rhetoric, 3 volumes, it's a great read. In it, he says this: of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are 3 kinds. The first depends on the personal character of the speaker, the ethos. The second, putting the audience into a certain frame of mind, pathos. The third, on the proof or apparent proof provided by the words of the speech itself, logos. Dumbed down for us in 2026, it's your character, who you are. It's the way you use emotion, pathos, and the way you use logic. So we're going to be looking a little bit at what I am calling the ethos effect. And there's 3 parts of it that I feel are especially applicable to you today. I'm going on the assumption already that you are men and women of character. You all seem amazing. Every one of you that I've gotten the chance to talk to so far. I already know that you're bringing hearts and passion into your conversations. But let's talk about a few elements that can really level up the way that you're communicating with your donors. And the first is your story. What drives you to do what you do today? Why do you work where you do? What happened in your past that compels you to work on the organization you work on behalf of? Sometimes when you think about sharing our stories and communication, we get kind of overwhelmed because it's like, well, which story to tell? How do I tell it? Well, my story's not interesting. It's not important. It's about, this cause that I'm raising money for. Your story matters. It what makes you uniquely you. I don't want to be able to take the talking points or the things you're planning on saying to a donor and be able to hand them to someone else in the room that's maybe more compelling, maybe more dynamic, and being able to have them deliver it better. So you need to bring your unique story to the rooms that you enter. One way to think about your stories, and we all have lots of stories, but for the sake of today, I want you to only think about the story of why you work where you do. What was the catalyst moment for you to choose to work where you do? One way to think about this, and then we're going to get to 2 more. Don't worry, they're coming. One way to think about this is framing it, I didn't understand blank until blank happened. So here's just a couple examples of what this might sound like. I didn't understand the true cost of clean water until I spent a summer in a village and saw a single mother walk 6 miles a day to just fill a single bucket. Or maybe it would sound like, I didn't understand the true power of a Catholic education until I saw a struggling family make a profound sacrifice for a seat in our classroom. I now believe every student deserves a school that nourishes their soul and their mind. So I'm going to give you guys a couple minutes. If you have not yet in the conference pulled out that notebook and that pen, Now is the time to do it. If you take notes on your phone, that's okay, but I'm expecting no scrolling on Instagram during this activity because I will call on you. I'm a mom of 4, and I do not mind awkward silences and putting people on the spot. So I didn't understand blank until blank happened. I'm going to give you guys a minute to think through your story of why you work where you do.
I didn't understand how little Catholics know and serve the Lord until I started leading small group Bible studies.
That's great. And over here?
I did not understand the impact of Sisters of St. Joseph had on healthcare until my husband spent his final days at the hospital.
That's powerful. Over here in the middle, can I get another one? Okay.
I didn't understand the real effect of the seminary in our life to make until I started working with solid value and the world.
Amazing. And we'll take one more over here. Yes.
I didn't understand homelessness until I met Eva. She shared with me her experience of domestic violence, sleeping in the rain with no shelter, couch surfing for shelter, and accepted favors for that couch.
Wow. Amazing. Don't we already all feel connected with those 4 individuals that shared just by hearing their heart and their passion for what they do? When you think of sharing that story, the one that you just wrote down with donors, there's some elements of storytelling. I can't give you a crash course on all of the things that have been said about storytelling all the time. I do want to highlight a handful of questions that I want you to take and consider on just that starting story that you wrote. And the first is what happened. You already kind of gave a little bit of a basis of what happened. I didn't understand this until this happened. But list out the facts. What actually happened? A lot of stories stop there. A happened, then B happened, then C happened, and we have actually just given people a list of linear facts. We have not brought them into a story. A couple of those, we heard some of the emotion around it, which brings us to the next one. How did I feel when it happened? I grew up in the 90s, and I grew up in the Midwest. I have parents that are not like overly touchy-feely. We do not talk about emotions at all. I mean, even as grown adults, like, no, we never talk about feelings at all. I'm pretty sure growing up, I literally thought there was 3 emotions. Like, you're either happy, you're sad, or you're angry. Like, that's it. Turns out, you learn in therapy that there's a lot. There are a lot of emotions that you could have. So I want you to start when you're telling a story, and this can even be in printed materials. This is not even necessarily when you're verbally speaking your story. I want you to think through what emotion, what feeling words go with that story. Maybe you were sad. Maybe you were actually just depressed. Were you happy, or were you actually really hopeful or inspired? Were you surprised, or were you eager, energetic? If you've never thought about printing out a feelings word list, I mean, this is literally Google feelings wheel. Consider putting something like this near where you write, whether that's that donor appeal letter that we've been hearing all of this great content about, whether that's the way that you're shaping your story, and make sure that you're capturing the right word for what you're feeling. Even Andrew yesterday gave us a great example of how words mean different things and evoke different feelings within their association. So think through, how did you feel when that experience happened? Another, what did I think when this happened? Sometimes this blends into those feelings words, sometimes it's entirely different. But when that experience happened, what did you think? What were my 5 senses doing? What did I see, hear, smell, touch, or taste? Knowing that when you had that conversation with somebody and you were sitting across a green Formica table in a 1960s, kitchen that smelled of stale cigarette smoke, that takes us a lot more into the scene than I was sitting across from somebody and they shared. So consider, how can you add in some of those sensory processing feelings to your action? This also, again, goes for when you're writing donor stories as well. And then where should I start my story? At the beginning, the middle, the end, especially if you're giving a presentation, consider starting with a cold open. I started right away. I have this client, Melanie. We're right in the center of a story. That story framework, I didn't understand until blank happened. One reason I like that is because it takes you into the center of the action. Sometimes, most of us are not as good of storytellers as we think we are. And we often give a lot of backstory. As I often share with my husband, Well, to make a short story long, because he married to me, like I make short stories long all of the time and add in a lot of extra details. But so asking yourself, where should I start this story? Consider if you're ever giving a presentation to start with a cold open right in the center of the action. Each of you has a story in this room. I want each of you to lean into the story that you have, the organization you work for, because your story, your relationship to your organization is compelling. It's compelling to the people you meet. It's compelling to your donors. You relate to them on that level because at one point you didn't work where you did. You've not been at your job since you were born. So at some point you joined the organization and you are passionate about it. That's why you work where you do. Share your story. Share your passion with those around you. Another public speaking tip, though, is what I call the authority statement, your expertise. What have you done professionally to lead you to the moment that you're at today? What happened in your work life that led you to where you are? A couple years ago, I was working with a client, amazing person. 2-star general, he had led NORAD, he had deployed thousands of troops in Afghanistan, and he was so humble that he was worried he didn't want to show off, that he wasn't even showing up in his life. And so I started kind of processing through with him and then other clients, okay, what is a way that you can place your credibility, whether it's in a speech, on social media, in a way that feels organic, authentic, that's not about you, that's about the audience. And so I came up with this template. Now I'm going to read through it. You'll see the red is like you're inputting your own. I'm going to give a couple examples and I'm going to give you a few minutes to come up with your own authority statement. For the last time period, I've walked alongside hundreds, thousands, millions, gazillions of business owners, leaders, pastors, parents, marriages, just like you. And I've been on a mission, obsessive journey, a quest, a personal journey to answer one question, thought-provoking question. If applicable, I've even written a book about this topic outlining everything I've learned. And this is what I found. Clear, strong, sticky statement. What does it sound like? I'm going to give you just a couple examples I created for the sake of today. Maybe it sounds like, I've spent the better part of 20 years in the trenches with thousands of Catholic leaders across the country. It's been a personal journey for me to answer one thing. How do we build a culture of generosity that lasts for the next generation? What has become incredibly clear to me is that we aren't just raising money to fund the mission, we are raising givers to find their mission. Or maybe yours might sound like, I spent the last decade working deep within our diocese, and when you see that many different communities, you start to get obsessed with one question. Why do some parishes thrive while others just survive? After looking at the data and the discipleship behind it, I found that it really comes down to this. We don't have a resource problem, we have a vision sharing problem. Now it's your turn. I want you to take this authority statement, feel free to change some of the words, make it your own, but I want you to work on your authority statement that you can start taking into rooms as well. As you're wrapping those up, I want you to find someone near you to partner up with. I want you to stand and I want you to read what you have so far. If you've never done this exercise, which I'm guessing most of you haven't, because as far as I know, I've invented this exercise. That's okay, take a picture, you can also finish up later. But for the sake of today, I want you to find someone near you, partner up, stand, and I want you to each take turns reading what you've created to the person next to you. And if you haven't done it, you'll be embarrassed and start participating so that you'll have something to share next time. I don't know where all you can use your authority statements. In conversation right now. Okay, I'm gonna bring us back in. How many of you feel like you know the people next to you a little bit better from that? More than likely, you're gonna need to spend more than a couple minutes figuring this out. I'm gonna encourage each of you to spend a little more time with this. Figure out what would be the conversational version of this that you might use at a networking event. How would you say this on social media, other places? But knowing your brand authority, your expertise and what you are bringing to a room is vital to increase the credibility that you have within a room. There's something else though. A few years ago, I got done speaking and went really well, a great group like you guys are today. I got done speaking, and a woman came up to me and she goes, "Sweetheart, I just loved your presentation. I was just so confused why you kept talking about queso." I went, "Queso? Like the cheese dip?" I was like, "Oh, thank you." Like queso. I'm driving home, and this comment just keeps rolling around and around. Queso. I didn't mention queso once. Like I mentioned Mexican. Like I'm literally round and around and around in my head. And then it dawned on me that I had been stringing together two filler words at the same time. Okay, so now that we've looked at content, we can do delivery. Okay, so now that we looked at delivery. Okay, so now that we've done this, and I realized I was mortified. Weak language can ruin our credibility. Whether your language is full of okay, so right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, okay, like, like when we're looking, when we're looking at all the great work we're doing, it's it's really great. Does that make sense? We all do it. We all can show up in a room a little bit better. You don't have to have your life be full of quesos, although now that I pointed out, you will hear several more, you'll be like, she's still doing it, and I'll see little chuckles. To kind of bring this to life, though, about authoritative language and how we can sound more credible, I'm going to pick on Kevin. Kevin and I go way back to yesterday. And so, Kevin, all I want you to do is I'm going to put a statement on the screen, and all I want you to do is just read it as written, okay?
Our new scholarship fund will send 12 more students to school next year, which is incredible. Does that make sense?
Okay, now, Kevin, I want you to do something for me. Can you go ahead and stand up? And now I want you to consciously plant your feet shoulder width apart, drop your shoulders, open up your arms and smile. And then now you're going to read. We are more trusting of people when we see palms. Research shows it. So you always want to show your palms in the first minute of speaking. Okay, now I want you to read the new one that comes on the screen.
Like this. Our new scholarship fund will send 12 more students to school next year. That is the greatest investment we can make in our community's future.
Wow, we all heard the difference, didn't we? What a difference. You can go ahead and sit down. Thank you, Kevin. How do we start reducing some of those okay so's, does that make sense, rights from our vocabulary? One big one is just pausing, the power of the pause. One of the most effective communication tools that the greatest speakers in the world use is the pause. Pause. Give yourself a minute to gather your thoughts. During presentations, you'll see one reason I make mine interactive is because my brain goes real fast and I start talking really fast, and I need to give myself a second to catch up, adjust my notes. Pause. Control the room with a pause. It feels long to you. It feels compelling to the person listening to you. The third piece of the ethos effect is delivery. We're going to talk for just a moment about body language. There's a lot of delivery tips and tricks when it comes to being a more compelling speaker. But for the sake of today, I felt that body language is the most important. Amy Cuddy has a fantastic TED Talk called "Our Nonverbals Govern How People Think and Feel About Us." Your body language may shape who you are. And she says, our nonverbals govern how people think and feel about us, but they also govern how we think and feel about ourselves. Body language is one of the most ways to grab hold of that 7 seconds with instant credibility. So let's talk about a few things that you can do. You can start implementing before you even leave the conference today to level up your body language. One is to just audit yourself. In conversations, what is your body language doing? Are you crossing your arms, putting your hand in your pocket, rolling on one foot, rocking back and forth? Or are you open and receptive to the people that you're talking with? Audit yourself. Sometimes you might not know. We all have blind spots when it comes to our body language. One way to kind of think through this is if you ever are giving a presentation like this, painfully, I'll watch my recording later, realize how many okay so's I had, but I'll also be watching for my body language. If you don't know, other people around you know. You can just ask them and say, hey, I'm working on my body language and I want to just be more open and inviting in my communication. How do you feel like my body language is? Another way is to audit others. When you hear other people speaking, other people presenting, other people delivering something on a Zoom call, the way that, anyone in this room at any time, just how are other people's body language? Is it warm? Is it inviting? What do they do that you like, that you might be able to emulate in your own life? Learn from watching others. You can even consider watching a TV show on mute, no sound, and just see, wow, how much of communication is communicated just by the way that we're showing up in the physical bodies that God has given us. A fun one is use the eyebrow flash. So when we see someone we know, we naturally raise our eyebrows. So good to see you. Oh, you can do this even for people you don't know, and it comes off as friendly and warm and receptive. Research has been done about it. So just remember, you can always flash your eyebrows when you're first meeting somebody. Make better eye contact. A study was done by Quantified Impressions. They researched thousands of people, and they found that most adults make eye contact 30 to 60% of the time. Interestingly, though, they did a study on CEOs just to see, do CEOs communicate? Do they have the same kind of body language as the rest of us do? And they found that actually, no, they do not. CEOs make eye contact consistently 70% of the time. This is called the leadership gaze. The problem with eye contact is a lot of times, especially when we're presenting or we feel like we're making it, because like just right now, I made eye contact with 30 of you and none of you are feeling it. Instead, I want you to hold one full thought with one person before you move on to the next person that you hold a full thought with, before you move on to the next person that you hold a thought with. Even in smaller groups, this works very effectively. Don't be weird. If you're one-on-one, you don't want to be here the whole time. Look away. Remember, 70% of the time, not 100% of the time, but making better eye contact is one of the best ways you can start becoming more compelling in your presentation. Ground yourself. We saw Kevin do this a minute ago. One way to reduce nerves, if you struggle with nerves while communicating, plant those feet shoulder width apart, drop those shoulders, open up your arms, and smile. Talk with your hands. I was thrilled, maybe this is like fake research, fake news, but I was thrilled when I read that people are more, according to research from the National Library of Medicine, that sounds legit, that we are more receptive to people when they are speaking with their hands. So you can just think like, sometimes people are like, ask a public speaking coach, like, what am I supposed to do with my hands while I'm talking? Just think airplane, from chest to waist. You live in this space all other times, but speak more with your hands. We like people more when they're speaking with their hands. As I tell my husband, I don't know if he believes me. Get in sync with the people around you. This is called mirroring. So you guys all naturally know how to do this. We do this in conversation every day. This is just a reminder to all of us that, if somebody's sharing a heartfelt story about how distraught they are of their adult child walking away from the faith, you're not changing subject with a bubbly tone. You're mirroring the emotion and the sentiment that they're sharing with you. And then give them something to hold. Research shows that we are more receptive to other people's ideas when body language is open. So this is kind of where an old school business card works out. This is why we all love networking events that have alcohol for more than one reason for some people. But it's because we have something to hold. We have something to do with our hands. So consider, it's old school, but consider having something that you hand them, because you've both given them something so they feel they've received something from you, but it also opens up their posture because now they're holding something. That's the first chunk. That's the first half of our presentation of who you are, the ethos effect. Your story, your authority, your delivery. If you do only what I've shared with you today, you are going to find that your communication skills have leveled up dramatically. But let's talk, though, about the content building blocks and 3 steps to building your mission's momentum in your communication and what you are bringing into donor meetings. The first is the stories we tell. We talked a moment ago about your story. You didn't understand this until that happened. Stories are the lifeblood of nonprofits. They are what compels donors to give. You are not asking them for money. You are inviting them into a story. You are inviting them into a legacy. Now, beyond the questions that we developed, there's an exercise I've started doing with clients, because a lot of times what happens with our stories, we tell a lot of stories that don't have a point. Every story you share should have a point that is clear to the audience. I was working with a pastoral team last year, and they have 8 different pastors on staff, the marriage ministry pastor, and they had 8 different pastors on staff, and they shared with me sometimes the thing that's challenging is finding different angles to story, different hooks. And so I introduced a concept to them that I've been using for several years now called story mapping. So I'm going to introduce this concept to you. So I'm wondering, are people in the room familiar with the fairy tale of Cinderella? Okay, is everybody familiar with Cinderella? Okay, in case it's been a hot second since you've had a 7-year-old, I have 4 kids, I have a 7-year-old who's obsessed with Disney princesses. Cinderella, stepfather, or her dad remarries evil stepmother, dad dies, stepmother's terrible, she has mean sisters, but then the invitation to the ball comes. She wants to go to the ball, but she can't because the mean stepmother, but fairy godmother, yay! She gets to go to the ball. She's running out, she loses her glass slipper. The next day, the evil stepmother locks her in a tower, but the mice bring her the key, and then she tries on the glass slipper and happily ever after. Okay, we all know the story. What's the point of the story? Can anybody shout out, what is Disney's point of the story? If you're like, what's the point of the story? Dreams can come true. That's what Disney would tell us. Dreams can come true. However, what if you shared that story from a wildly different angle? What if you shared this story from the stepmother's perspective, or her friend Gus the mouse's perspective? Or what if your story had a lot of different angles of it? So you can't read this very well. This was on my bulletin board. You could say that the point of the Cinderella story, I call this story mapping. So you put your story in the center, your personal story, the story of your Joan, or the scripture you want to highlight. And then what would be the different stories? Well, Cinderella, you could say dreams can come true. That's what they would say. You also could say the point of that story is that one outfit really can change your life. Or maybe it's don't let others define your true worth. Or maybe it's true beauty comes from within. Or your past doesn't have to define your future. Maybe it's just go to the ball, take the risk. Maybe it's, transformation is possible for everyone. Maybe it's everyone needs a fairy godmother. The point here is, what's your story's point? It could have numerous points, numerous angles, numerous ways of telling it. Especially when you start thinking about something like sharing a familiar story with your donors, how can you find a different angle to think through your story? So I'm going to give you guys just a minute. I want you to draw a circle on your page, and I want you to write, it could be the story you just wrote for the sake of today, I didn't understand this until this happened. What is the point of your story? So think key point, and then I want you to just do a few little veins off of it and think through different angles you could perhaps tell that story. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to do that. When I was first starting my business, someone informed me that people buy based on emotions, and they justify it with logic. Has anybody ever heard that expression before? Think about it. I mean, logically, we should all buy generic peanut butter. Logically, it costs less, tastes the same. Emotionally, I grew up in a family where, actually we did buy generic, but my kids are growing up in a family where we have Jif because Jif is better. Logically, you would, make simpler choices, easier choices. We make more complicated choices all the time. So back to Aristotle, the ethos that we bring to the room, there's also that pathos and that logos. Stories are the pathos, the emotional driven thing. Ultimately, though, your donors need numbers. We all share numbers all of the time because it's that logic that helps back and bolster up that emotional things. So we need to talk about the numbers we share and how we share those numbers in our communication. I am a mom of 4, and my youngest is 4 years old. And anybody else have 4-year-olds in their life? I was talking earlier. Okay, 4-year-olds are amazing. You never know what they're going to say. This last Halloween, I was like, "Hey, buddy, what do you want to dress on?" And he goes, "Pizza." And I go, "Like a piece of pizza? Pizza, pepperoni pizza." So he got a pepperoni pizza sandwich board costume. We walked all up and down the street. So this kid says the craziest things all of the time. One morning, because we have terrible parenting skills with the 4th, you just get so tired, you start giving up on life. And so he's sleeping with me from 3 a.m. onward. I wake up and I roll over and he goes, very first thing I hear, waking up to, he goes, Mommy, you just tooted. I did not toot. He thought it was hilarious. Peals of laughter. So anyway, all that to say, kids are hilarious. They say funny things. I pick him up last week from his mom's day out program. He goes to a couple mornings a week. He looks out the window and he goes, Mommy, I love you a million much. Here's a kid that can't even count to 17, but he loves me a million much. And I feel that love. It's so big. And I knew in his little 4-year-old brain, that is the biggest number he could comprehend. A million much. It's a lot of a number. The problem is a lot of us in our nonprofits, we communicate million much numbers to our donors. And they have no idea what they mean, and they have no perspective of what it's a lot, and it makes us feel good, but what does it actually mean? And so I want to challenge you with a few ideas of how you can share numbers more effectively. The best book I have read on this topic is Making Numbers Count by Carla Starr and Chip Heath. And a few of these ideas that I'm going to share come from their work. No one is a numbers person because the human brain evolved to only truly grasp numbers up to about 5. Beyond that, everything is just lots. So how do we communicate our numbers in our communication to our donors in a way that is sticky and memorable? Here are a few ideas. One is translate everything. Say things like, to put that in context, to put that in perspective, what this means is, think of it this way, by comparison. Beginning, I shared that we'll check our phones 186 times a day. That's a lot. Wow, once every 5.5 minutes I'm awake, ooh, that feels a lot more visceral and real. So make sure you're translating everything. Put the numbers into the human scale. So for an example, it costs $12,000 to educate one child, but we only charge $8,000 in tuition. That's a lot of numbers. That's a math problem, and we want this to be a mission opportunity. So how could we make something like this in our communication sound more missional? For every school day a student is here, there's a $22 gap between what they pay and what it actually costs to keep the lights on and the Bibles open. That's essentially the cost of a modest lunch. Your gift hosts that student's education for the day. Which is more powerful? Which do you comprehend more? The second one. Another idea, recast into time and landmarks or concrete objects. Time is one of the most visceral ways to make a number feel real. If you're talking about the longevity of a solution or the frequency of a problem, you need to move it into a human timeline. So, for example, instead of 2.1 million households in our region experience food insecurity annually. That's a lot. It's a million much. In our city, a family sits down to dinner they can't afford every 15 seconds. And by the time I finish this sentence, 3 children will have asked their parents if there's enough for seconds, and the answer will be no. Maybe, food bank distribution example. Instead of our food bank distributed 12 million pounds of food to families in need this year. Last year, we moved 12 million pounds of food. If you stack these grocery bags on a football field, like we just saw during the Super Bowl, they would cover every single inch of the grass from end zone to end zone and reach 8 feet high. You didn't just donate food, you built a mountain of relief that spans an entire stadium. Another concept, use the village of 100. Fractions and percentages often force our brains to do math, which kills the emotion. So Starr and Heath recommend using the village of 100, using a nice, easy to understand round number, 20, 50, 100, 10. So instead of sounding like 60% of our students require some form of tuition aid to attend, maybe it sounds like if you walk into a classroom of 20 students, 12 of those children are only at their desks because of a donor like you. Without your support, more than half the room goes empty. This is how you combine logos, logic, with pathos and emotion. People need both. They want to know the numbers, the big numbers, but you need to put that in perspective to break this down, what this means. So share both. Share the big number and then break it back down into an easy to understand way. So for the sake of an exercise, I just Googled a couple days ago, I said, relief organizations in Phoenix. And one that came up was the Phoenix Rescue Mission. This sounds like an amazing organization that reaches the homeless in this city. And like many nonprofits I have come alongside and worked with, their website looks like this. It has big numbers. So for just a couple minutes, I want you to take one of these numbers and figure out a way you could translate it for them. Let's just pretend you're their consultant for a minute. And how would you translate one of these numbers? So if you want, you can partner up with somebody. Just don't get too loud because I'm gonna have to bring it all back again. So I'm gonna give you guys a couple minutes to just look at these numbers and think, how could I make one of these numbers sound a little bit more human? Some ways to think about this when you are thinking about your numbers, dividing by 365, how many people every day, 24 hours in a day. So in this case, when I, briefly thought of it, it's like, well, even today, there's 130 of us in this room. So that middle stat, 2,000 people, that would be as if this entire room of people were to die 15 times in a year. That's how many people are dying of drug overdose here in Phoenix. What I want you guys to see from this example is that your organization is sharing numbers all of the time with donors. 60%, 100%, millions, thousands, bazillions, gazillions. It's all just lots. It's a million much. Makes us feel good, makes us feel great. But what does that mean? What does that translate? Sometimes even funneling down into the one, we've heard a lot about that, the big number and then it's the donor story, right? It's the big number and then it's that one story. But think through, I want to challenge each and everyone to think through the numbers that you regularly share in your communication. First of all, you should have some go-to numbers that you share because it combines. It's great that you have that emotion and that heart and that passion and you're bringing your story, but you also need to bring that logical side to your donors. So if you're not sharing numbers, you probably should. If you are sharing numbers, are you sharing them in a way that's compelling to the people that you're speaking to? And then the final step on building your mission's momentum is the vision we imagine. I personally worked in the nonprofit space for a very long time. And one of the things I love about working in nonprofit space and working with nonprofit leaders is how passionate everybody is about the mission. Sometimes I have worked in environments where, gosh, if we just had another development officer, if we just had a social media manager. And it's hard not to get focused as a leader on your short-term needs because you legitimately need somebody to do all of this work. That is not always the most overly compelling to our donors. And I have a client who says that we always need to extend the time horizon. And I love that expression. And so I like to think of it as, what world do you imagine? In 5 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, when we're all dead and gone, what kind of world do you imagine for your organization? Because that is what you're inviting your donors into. You're inviting them into a legacy. It's not about today and the new building, the new center, the new, the scholars, but it's about the legacy impact of what their gifts. So an exercise I love to do with my clients, I imagine a world in which ... If everybody were to just do what you would like them to do, what world do you imagine? And give them that vision. I'm going to give you guys just 1 minute to think, I imagine a world in which ... I want you to write down your answer to this. What world do you imagine 50, 100 years from now when none of us are longer here? Okay, I'm going to ask for a couple volunteers. Is anybody finished with theirs? Yes.
Well, I imagine a world where people in the West return and revive the Christian foundation of the civilization.
It's beautiful. I would love a few more examples. Yes.
I imagine a world in which people return with abundance the gifts of God.
Love that. How about one over here? Yes.
I imagine a world where there's access to Catholic education, information, and all of it.
I love that. And one over from this side of the room. Yes.
I imagine a world in which everyone feels healthy, safe, sheltered, and loved.
I love that. I want you guys to spend more time after today thinking of the future that you imagine. Your organizations does this, but I want you to also do it individually. What world do you imagine? And start sharing that with your donors. Now, as a public speech coach, I'm supposed to tell you that if you just do all these things, all the tips and the tricks, that it's enough. But there's one last key component about public speaking that I always like to end on because to me it is the most important thing. And that is to be fully present and engaged in the moment you are in and the audience you're with. In 1963 on the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr. gave one of the most iconic speeches of all time. I have personally watched this dozens of times because I'm a nerd and I love listening to vocal variety and all of the different things. But one of the things that people do not know about this speech is it is not the I Have a Dream iconic speech that we all think of was not the speech that he planned to give that day. In fact, he had, talking points, he had his whole thing. There's even a point in his talk where you can kind of see him like shift his notes over and like look up. Because a few minutes before he spoke, gospel singer and his friend Mahalia Jackson said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin, tell him about the dream." And he got up there and he spoke fully present in the moment from his heart. And so as a speech coach, truly the best piece of advice I can give you is to always be fully present in the moment that you're in with the people that you are with. God will give you the words. He will give you the insights. It doesn't matter if you have some filler words and if you stumble over them, because what matters the most is that you are present in the moment that you are in and fully in tune with that moment in history. And so learn about public speaking, spend a little bit more time on it, work on some of these skills, learn how to tell your stories better, your numbers better, figure out how you can be a little bit more dynamic in your body language and not look like you're gonna be taking flight like the whole time I have, or dropping in quesos. Work on all of those things. But ultimately, the best thing that you can do is to be fully engaged, fully present in the moment that you are in. Thank you guys for having me. In the words of my son, Charlie, I love you guys all a million much. And I hope that we will, I hope that I'll get to share with you more again in the future. If you do want to get in touch with me, I do have some free resources on my website, and I love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I post a lot of public speaking content, and I have a newsletter that hopefully you will find helpful as well. So thank you guys so much for having me today.